Hello and good evening from London. I'm Orna Ross and I'm here with the wonderful Dalma of Publish Drive. Hi, Dalma.
Hi, Orna, and I'm here from Budapest, Hungary.
Budapest, Hungary, and London, England. That's the Alliance of Independent Authors for you, all over the place.
Absolutely.
We are delighted to be back with you with our second ever self-publishing poetry salon, and we're winding into this new stream of podcasts and Facebook Live videos for ALLi. We didn't have a dedicated poetry stream. We touched on poetry occasionally in the other streams before, but this season we're dedicating an entire stream to poetry because we know that lots of you are self-publishing poetry, or you're wondering, should you, can you, and how is it different? How is it the same as publishing fiction and non-fiction? Where are the similarities, where are the differences, and so on. And today we're going to, each month we take a particular theme, and today we're going to be talking about self-publishing chapbooks, as they're called in the poetry world, pamphlets as the rest of the world knows them. And some people, I think chapbook is a term that's more popular in the UK maybe, and pamphlets in the US, I'm not sure. But anyway, they both mean the same thing. Little small books, sometimes just 20 pages or so. So I think a full poetry collection is considered to be 50 pages plus. So anything short of that is, in other words, the 50 pages is the shortest a book a collection can be. Is that right? Is that your understanding too? Yeah.
I would say that they have quite a history. So they haven't popped up, only in the 20th century or the 21st century. They've been around ever since publishing itself. But one of the first things about it is that it's definitely one of the most connected to self-publishing because it's quite cheap to do yourself. And it's good for emerging writers to get their, feel of how to publish their own work. So it's quite something to start with.
I think so. I think poets always did this kind of self-publishing when fiction writers and non-fiction writers didn't. Any poetry event you would ever go to would have the poet going around selling the little book for £1 or £2 or £3 or giving it away sometimes. So in a sense, that was, before we had digital publishing, and they were the first into print, if you like, and there are amazing. I hear in the British Library, to your point, Dalma, about the history of poetry pamphlet publishing. There is an amazing collection in the British Library and in the Poetry Library in the South Bank Centre of chapbooks and pamphlets by poets who went on to become very eminent and very well known, but began with their little poetry pamphlet.
I think the most famous one is Allen Ginsberg's Howl, which started off beat poetry in the 50s and the 60s. So a lot of times when you were a poet and you couldn't publish your own work because it was not publishable by the traditional standards, because it contained some kind of content that you couldn't talk about, then you turned to this particular genre or form of publishing.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. So this is going to be quite a practical session. We're going to talk about how you put a chapbook together, essentially. So a quick whiz through the 7 processes of publishing. I just a little bit of personal history. My very first self-published book was a poetry pamphlet, one of these little fellows. Yeah. So what I do, can you see it? I'm not making it easy for people to see. Yes, that's one there.
Yes, I think
there's another one there. They come in all colors: red, green, purple, blah, blah, blah. So what I do is when I have 10 new poems, basically, I put a chapbook together and I put it out there, and they get a flurry of sales when they're first published, and unless I promote them, then they just kind of die back down. But there's another one on the way. And then when I have a few of them, that's when I begin to dig in and pull the poems together into a more substantial collection. So also to say that they are very good for themed and, small themed collections. And so this is my Christmas book, which does really well every year as a stocking filler, 12, just 12 poems. And the thing about poetry is, and particularly some kinds of poetry, is that it's very intense reading experience, and the words are dense and, well laid out on the page, and it bears reading and rereading and rereading. So actually 10 or 12 poems is a very manageable and nice kind of reading experience for a reader. And it's a great way for them to get to know your work in the first place, see do they want more. But it's a great reading experience in and of itself. And readers do like this format also. So just quickly then talking about, there are 7 processes to publishing, which those of you who have published in other genre, nonfiction or fiction, will be, very aware of. And there are slight differences for poetry in some of these. So just moving kind of briskly through them. First of all, there's the editing stage. So poetry editing is a little bit different in the sense that there's kind of 2 schools of thought. So like everybody, poets need an editorial process. So that may be giving your poem to a poetry editor, and that is even more tricky, I think, for poetry than it is for fiction or nonfiction. So finding a good editor is hard at any times, but for poetry, it can be difficult to find somebody who matches your style, gets what you're about, and poets can be very, very attached to our words and our word formations and our word choices, our sentence structures, our stanza structures, and so on. You're nodding furiously there, yes.
Absolutely. What was the most difficult for you, do you think? That have you worked with an editor yourself?
Well, this is where I'm going to fess up. The other school for poetry is you need an editorial process, but it's not necessarily an editor. So the way I go through the editing process for my poetry is I have a few very trusted readers who know what I'm trying to do and who challenge me, excuse me, and who really challenge me. 2 of them are poets themselves. The other is a rabid, is the only way to describe it, poetry reader. Just reads poetry every day, knows everything about poetry, every form, everything, and is just a fantastic critic. So that's my process. I actually work with the 3 of them, and they come back always with something interesting. I don't put every poem through them. That's the other thing. And this is kind of controversial for somebody who completely believes in the importance of editors for fiction and nonfiction. Sometimes poems do arrive complete, and you can't touch them. To touch them is to ruin them. And so I don't pass those ones on. They tend to be short. They're dream when they come. They don't come very often. But if they come that way, you just get this kind of feeling, and you can't touch it yourself, never mind give it to somebody else to kind of comment on. Have you seen anything around the editing process you'd like to discuss?
I would say what you said before, that it's quite good to work with a collection of poets, a group of poets together to review each other's work, because you understand that thought process. If someone is from the outside, you don't necessarily, even sometimes as a reader, you would say that, I understand what you're trying to say here, but I don't know, something is missing. And you as a poet would say, but this is what I felt at the moment. And, this is an impression of a moment that this is how I can write it down. And as you said before, sometimes it ruins it completely. So I would say it's better to work with a group of poets. And throughout history, that's what worked the best whenever poets were around. It was a group of poets working together, influenced each other.
Yeah, I think I'm putting together a long. I agree with that, and if you, as you say, if you read the history of poetry, and certainly in English, that's what you see, and they are severe and most interesting editors of each other's work. I think there is an exception for me. I'm working on a long poem, a long kind of epic thing, and I think I will actually need formal editor for that. And I'm finding that person is not going to be easy, maybe, but I think that it's moving into the territory of being it's narrative, and it's moving into the territory of being more like a short story or something, which I think would benefit from a more formal editing process.
Yeah.
So after editorial, then we have design. We have a question from Joyce. So we'll talk about the fonts and things as Joyce has asked the question. She said, do you know what the best font for poetry is? Do you have any thoughts on that, Dalma?
Interesting. I think in print, it's different than digital publishing. What do you think about that? Because in print, I would say design works a little differently than in when you digitally publish something. I would say the most simple is the most effective, because the words themselves are speaking for themselves. And if you are writing in a very elaborate font, it might draw attention from the meaning of the words. But what do you think about that?
Completely agree. Yeah, one of the classic, most boringest fonts you can get your hands on is I think what's desirable. I work in Palatino, but any of the standard fonts are fine. It's exactly as Dalma said. You want the meaning of the words to be what people are taking notice of. The exception might be on Instagram or the visual platforms. If you're putting your poems up there, you might want something that catches the eye more. You might work with an illustrator as well. You might do a handwritten font if you wanted. And the other thing is that font does depend on genre. So if you're doing, say, romantic lyrical poetry, you might choose a different kind of font than if you're doing, I don't
inspirational
know, or short, sharp shock stuff. Yeah, exactly. So play around with it. I think it should be a font that you like, and I think it should be a font that fits well. This is the other thing you have to think about in terms of the interior design, the fit and flow of the lines. So you don't want a font that takes you into line breaks more than another one would, if you know what I mean. And that's to do with the size of the font on the page, as well as it's different in ebook, because obviously sizes go up and down. The reader controls the size in that instance. And reading poetry in ebook, it can lose some of what the poet intended in terms of line breaks. Sometimes, particularly if people put it up to read at a very high resolution, sometimes then the lines are breaking kind of all over the place or in the wrong place. So yeah, Joyce is happy anyway.
Add one more thing, especially regards to chapbooks, you should use the same font. So be consistent. I think nothing upsets the reader more than if you're using different type of fonts and different formats, in that it can be disturbing in a way when you're reading. So I think you should go for as simple as possible and as consistent as possible.
Excellent point on the consistency. I have seen chapbooks where it's a different font on every page and different size headings and things, and you actually put it down, don't you? You can't. There's something makes you go, oh, it just doesn't. It does not work for poetry. So yeah, that's a really good point. Julie has a question here. I like to put photographs with poems and have a theme. And that's quite usual. Ingram Spark will not do colour content, which is at all cost effective, just a tiny bit of colour, and they treat the whole thing as colour. Any suggestions? Alas, not from me. I don't know, Dalma might have a solution to your problem, but to my knowledge, every single printer does the same. It's either black and white, or if it's got a speck of red in it, it becomes colour. I don't think there's anything can be done about that, Julie, which is why you will actually see a lot of poets working with black and white. So very often it's surprising how many things in form and format of literature are down to cost over the years, things you don't realize, and this is certainly one of them. So sorry not to be able to give you better news there.
Just adding to black and white, I think it works really well with poetry. Actually, the chapbook that I've wrote, this is a Hungarian one, but it has quite pretty black and white, very dramatic. The contrast gives an emotional background, which goes really well with the poems themselves. And since you're putting your words black and white to the paper, then, it goes well hand in hand. So it might work out.
Yeah, I think so. And that's lovely. That's a lovely book. And I know you've more books to show us, because the other thing we need to think about when we're thinking about design, obviously, is the cover. So do you want to show us some of the covers that you've brought us there to have a look at? So, I mean, there's so much variety in chapbook publishing. That's one of the things that's so exciting about it. And you can do your chapbooks as standalones or as series. I'll talk about series in a moment, but Dalma has loads of lovely standalone pamphlets here she's been collecting all over the world.
So this is from my hometown, Budapest. So you can see this is quite simple, but very abstract, and it certainly shows that the poems are going to be abstract themselves, but as you said, cost effective. So it's black and white, but I think it's very lovely in any way. This is more, as I've shown before, black and white, but it has a great consistency with the design itself. So it's very emotional. The whole thing actually is a cover itself, so you can pull it down. I think it's a little bit more expensive than the one I showed before. This is the most simple one. I think you can do it yourself, actually. So if you just go to a simple standalone printer, you can do it yourself. It's black and white, but it works well as well. So and this is something different. This is actually when you have a photo, it's also very emotional, and it works with only 2 colors. It's monochrome. This is a little bit more complicated and a little bit more expensive, I would say. So I think these are the ones that I collected from the last 2 ones from the US, and the before they are European. So yeah, I can say that.
Lovely. And so what I do with mine, it's very simple, because I don't do, or haven't done as yet, any kind of picture book, with pictures inside. And Julie has come back to say, okay, 2 things. Julie has come back to say the traditional publishers have been okay with the colour thing, but it's the POD process for Ingram Spark that is the problem. And I guess I was talking about Ingram Spark and Kindle, KDP print, because we do tend to work with POD. As poets, generally speaking, you don't want or need a big consignment of poetry pamphlets in your garage, because they're quite, unless you have an outlet for them, of course, in which case you'd be placed to go with a consignment printer and get a decent consignment, and you will have more flexibility around your design if you do that. But when we're looking at print on demand, we're looking at a more constrained. We get a lot of advantages. We don't have to store the books. We can just pay as we go and all of that, especially with your ALLi discount. But yes, you do have these constraints, and it is more expensive per copy and so on. So sorry, Julie. Yes, I should have made that distinction, and thank you for highlighting it. Kim is saying, Dalma, if when we're showing the books, we need to hold them up higher. We have a name badge. We have a name badge that actually you can't see from that side on it.
Okay.
So yeah, we will do that going forward, Kim. Sorry.
Sure.
So yeah, what I do, I think, is the simplest form of pamphlet publishing. So it is essentially, I work with vellum, which you can only use if you work on Mac. So if you're PC users, it doesn't work. So I think there is a workaround. But anyway, there are lots of good formatting software out there, and Scrivener I used to work with before I started working with vellum. It's just vellum makes formatting an absolute treat, and they have a verse, very simple. It keeps verse very, the structure of the poetry very, very simple, but that's fine because I work within the limits and it works out just fine. So create then a PDF file, and then I work with Jane Dixon Smith and Design for Writers, those two designers on different lines that I'm doing. So these just get a PDF file of where am I going, which direction there? I hope you can see that. Front and back, it just comes as an A4, and it's a wraparound cover, and you just essentially send the files off then to Ingram Spark or KDP Print. The book is up on Amazon. You do both. You use Ingram Spark for the extended distribution, and for the possibility if bookstores wanted to order your book or anybody else, they can do that through Ingram Spark, and you do KDP Print for the Amazon ecosystem. And with Ingram, you can sell your books on your own website, and they will do the fulfillment for you as well. So it means that as a poet, very often people are put off doing pamphlets because they think they will end up with this consignment print in this garage full of books that they're not able to ship. But actually, you can, with POD, you don't have that problem. Sasha has a question. What makes a chapbook a chapbook as opposed to a normal book? Is it just page length? Yes, it is. It is. Anything under 50 pages is considered a chapbook. A poetry book is 50 pages, something between 50 and 100 pages usually, but of course can be any length.
Yeah.
Corrine has a comment as well. I print mine locally, 150 or 200 at a time. It's full colour, high quality, and the cost price is €3. I sell online and locally. I'm in total control. I may create ebooks as well. I live in Portugal. Fantastic, Corrine, and thank you for your contribution. I definitely think you should do ebooks as well. If you are selling well in print, you are likely to also sell. And if you have your print files, converting them into a digital ebook file is not difficult, and something we'll be covering on another show. So yeah, I think you should. Oh, and there's Sasha saying you can use Mac in cloud with vellum if you're a PC user. I can't recommend vellum highly enough. I used to hate formatting, and it's not, don't have that kind of left brain that's good at that kind of thing, but it makes it fun. It really does. So yeah, but you may, obviously people have their own favorite formatter. So yeah, anything else before we leave design? We're only on the second stage of the publishing process here. The program's nearly over. Have you anything else on design before we leave it?
No, I think we should go on.
Yeah, great. So design distribution, actually, we have kind of covered. So except to say, except not on the ebook side, which I will let you do the talking about that. We've covered print essentially, use both Amazon and Ingram for POD, and use your consignment printer if you want. Corinne has also raised Blurb, which is a good, a very good service provider if you have photographs in particular. They're very good on anything photographic. Yeah. So ebook distribution for poetry chapbooks, Dalma.
Yeah, so ebook distribution, as you know, I work for an ebook distributor aggregator, Publish Drive, and what I would recommend to do is not to be exclusive on Amazon, but especially go to libraries, go to reader subscription services like Scribd. I would not recommend, I cannot recommend Scribd highly enough in that regard.
For poetry?
You can find, yeah, for poetry. You can find most poets there. As you know, I would say that since poetry is spreading, but especially because you know, the format is short and concise, and you can read it on your phone whenever you go around. And you might not get people to give, I don't know, £5 or £3 per volume. But if you're a reader subscriber and you have, you know, you just pay $8 per month, then, and you have, you know, basically you can read as many books as you want, then you might check out a volume of poetry, and you don't feel that you're paying for it. So that's why I recommend you to definitely use or get your books to reader subscription services or libraries, because a lot more people are going to check it out than if you just put it on Amazon. I'm not saying you shouldn't put it on Amazon, you should, but I would say cover as many stores as possible. Just to make it complete, what is an aggregator? If you are just starting out, basically an aggregator is if you have your book, you upload it to our services, let's say Publish Drive, but there are other aggregators as well. And you can select which are the stores that you want your books distributed to. And you can manage all of these stores on one platform. And basically the distribution is handled by us. And then in case of Publish Drive, you get your royalties 100%, and you pay a monthly fee, but it, you know, it works differently with every single aggregator, it's different. But you can access 400 different stores, and you know, it just covers a lot of ground. You can get international access. So these are all good things, but reader subscription, libraries, these are good for poetry, definitely.
Fantastic. So yeah, I think that's about it on distribution. But of course, just having your book available, while it's really important, and as Dalma says, be in as many places as possible. We often get people saying, should I go with Amazon or Apple, for example? Both is the answer.
Yes.
And more, you know, as many as possible. And the beauty of digital is that that's not hard these days.
Yeah.
So, but the book won't sell itself probably. You're going to need to come up with a marketing strategy for your poetry, and poetry is slightly different. And we don't have time to go into marketing poetry books today, because we're going to give that a full show soon. And we also have a question from Julie about audio and poetry, and we're going to go into that fully separately, Julie, another day, because we wouldn't be able to give you a meaningful answer just on the fly. It's a topic in and of itself. So that's our next two shows taken care of, obviously. But yeah, you will, the thing to say here and for you to kind of take away is the poetry reader. What is the poetry reader looking for what is the question to which your poems are the answer? So poetry is not a genre, it's a kind of a super genre. It's an umbrella of lots of different kinds of genres. So people who read my poems are not going to read somebody else's. It's very individual and it's very specific. And people, when they find the genre that they like, they're thrilled with it. And often you find people saying, I don't like poetry, until they actually find the genre of
The
poetry
one,
that they do like. Exactly. And there is one for everyone.
Absolutely.
So until we get to talking about marketing poetry in our next session, it would be great for you to think about what is the promise that's kind of inherent in your poetry, because that's what marketing is. It's a kind of a promise to the reader that says, if you open this book, this is what you're going to get in or about. You can kind of expect ABC, and I will surprise you as well with XYZ, but it will be within this kind of identifiable category. So, my books, you've got this kind of flower thing going on, you've got the flouncy font and all of these things. These are all signifiers of inspirational poetry, and that's the genre that I write in. And that design gets carried over into the collections, which pick up on either the font or the picture or the sense and the feeling, so that there is a kind of a carryover between the chapbooks and the collections, so that people again know what to expect. So a lot of marketing is about making the reader comfortable. When the reader's comfortable, they'll spend money, they will buy. When they're uncomfortable, they put their money back in their wallet or whatever. So anything brief to say on marketing in 2 minutes before we kind of we keep it for next time?
I would say you covered all bases. So marketing is highly emotional, as you said. So if a person feels uncomfortable, then they're not going to buy. If they feel emotionally attached to the product, and in this sense, their volume of poetry, they're going to give it a chance. So that's it.
Great. So they are essentially the processes that you have to follow. I'm not going to talk about right sales and stuff like that, which is, when it comes to poetry, very much on the sideline, but just thinking about those various stages and phases of publishing, it's quite easy. And that is the thing that I would like to leave you with, that it really is quite easy these days to put a chapbook together. It's never been cheaper, and it's never been easier, and it's never been easier to take it to more and more people, because, in those old days that we were talking about, you turned up at your reading and you were lucky if there were 15, 20, 50, 50 people at a poetry reading would be, an absolute sellout in those days. Yeah. Now you've got Rupi Kaur filling giant stadia with thousands of people. So things are changing with poetry, and it's because of digital. It's because of ebooks and social media platforms and so on, that are taking that, so that no matter what genre you write in, and no matter how niche you feel your genre is, there are enough people worldwide who are likely to be interested enough in your book for it to have an impact with them. So
one of the things that we also talked about before is how to get it going, contests, and how you go into chapbook contests. And I think you mentioned that you published quite a list of contests that you can enter your book into.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. I had completely forgotten after going to the trouble of putting that blog post together today. Yes, we said that we would, one of the ways to kind of get your chapbook noticed is to enter it for competitions. And there are lots of competitions for which publication is the prize. And as self-publishing poets, that's not much use to us, because we can actually publish it ourselves, probably as well as a secondary publisher can, especially when it comes to poetry, unless they've got a significant reach or a really good marketing plan or whatever. So we have isolated a number of competitions where there are cash prizes. So you'll find that on my own author website, ornaross.com/poetry pamphlet, or just go to the blog. It's the latest post on the blog, but it's poetry pamphlet competitions. And there are a number of them worldwide with different kind of closing dates, and they all have a cash prize. And it can give you a deadline to work towards. Competitions are very much part of the poetry world. For individual poems, for chapbooks, and for full-on collections. So it's a way to get eyeballs on your work outside of the reader system, people who can kind of elevate it and pass it on and bring it to their readers and so on. So one final question before we leave. It comes from Joyce. Do you think it would be okay to use a pen name as a poet? And the answer is actually it's very desirable if you have other writing that you would separate out your poetry and your other writing. So if you're publishing fiction or non-fiction, it would be a good idea not to do what I did and stick everything out there all together, because I did that back in the days when I didn't realize that it confuses the algorithm. So you're best to keep one author name for one kind of writing. So if you're writing sort of crime thrillers and poetry, then the algorithms on the online retailers get very mixed up. They don't know what author bots to put with you and so on. So a pen name would actually be a desirable thing. So Joyce, she wants to do children's stories also. Highly recommend you to get two names, Joyce. All right, folks, so that is it for this month. The podcast will be out on Wednesday, which will include the highlights from this chat that Dalma and I have had, and also some readings, some of your readings, in the section that we call Indie Poetry, please. If you would like to submit your poetry for that, Indie Poetry, please, you will find the instructions for that at ornaross.com/indie poetry, please. So it means submitting some audio poetry of you reading and the text, and each month we will feature some indie poets doing their thing, which is really nice. Nice to be able to do that, because poetry is short. We can. So that's it until next time, and thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. And in the meantime, may your life be filled with poetry.
Absolutely.